My name is Craig Hunter, and I've been the pastor of Trinity Presbytery Church in Denton for about 3 years now, and I've been on the Peacemaking Committee of the Presbytery for basically that entire time. This trip somewhat originated with my own faith journey. I first went to the region in college and went back to live and work through the Presbyterian Church USA. I worked there for a year in Bethlehem in 1990 to 2000, and that year especially really changed my life and has had a big effect on my life ever since then. And so I've been back to the region several times since for various conferences. I had led a group from the church I served in Tokyo, and in consultation with the Peacemaking Committee, we decided that we thought this was a unique opportunity for us to lead another group on behalf of the Presbytery. There are a few things that set this trip apart from most trips to the region. One was we spent a fairly extensive time together in preparation before we went. I firmly believe that the more you know before you go, the more you get out of the trip. And so we had about 15 1.5-hour session classes over the course of almost 4 months before we went. Now, not everybody came to all of those classes, but that's a pretty extensive period of preparation. We took a historical survey starting with about 1500 BC, going up through the Old Testament history, through the area at the time of Christ, through the Byzantine Empire and the Arab conquest and the Crusades. Then the last about third of the class was on the modern Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That was one of the things, that preparation I think set it apart. Another thing was I have a lot of experience in this area. This is kind of my passion and my baby, so to speak, for the last 10, really 15 years of my life. Lately I've been teaching classes at the University of North Texas on this subject. I've talked about it in many other churches. It's really my passion with my experience in having lived there and studied there and worked there. And I think that's something unique that I bring to the table. And then the third and perhaps most important thing that made this trip a little bit different was that it was conceived as having two big parts, basically equal parts. One part was to visit the different biblical and holy sites, and I know that for most people who go over there, they're probably not going to come back. And the area is so rich in the historical context in which our faith arose. So we, of course, went to the Galilee, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, all of the major sites that pilgrims normally go to. There are a million minor sites, and we couldn't go to all of those. But that was a big part of the trip, and I let people know that before we went. The other big part of the trip, and this is especially the peacemaking part of the trip, is we visited with a very large number of different peace and justice organizations over there. Both Israeli as well as Palestinian, as well as international, different individuals, different organizations, quite a few, to the extent that that was really about half of the trip. And that's something that the vast majority of tourists get little to no exposure to what is really going on there. When I lived and worked in Bethlehem 10 years ago, we knew that the vast majority of tourists that would come into the West Bank to Bethlehem for about 2 hours, never really meet any Palestinians and leave, and never really learn much about the situation. And the situation there is, as I think we will hear, a very urgent situation in which, whether we like it or not, we already have a substantial role. So that aspect of the trip also set it apart from most of the other trips that go over to that area. This trip really had two main goals, which were related to the two kind of halves of the trip, or you could even say three goals. But one half was understanding more of the context, the Old Testament and New Testament context in which our faith arose. Going to the area, seeing the landscape, learning more about the history. The land has sometimes been called the fifth gospel, because you get a different sense of what the context was like, of how the space relates to other spaces around from being there. It's a beautiful country, and I think for people who go there, they'll never forget many of the sites that they visited. And so there are certain passages in the Bible that you might read differently after having been there. So that was one of the goals. The other goal was to deepen one's understanding about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I have found in my adult life and in my teaching that Americans' understanding is very limited and also that understanding can only be deepened to a limited extent through talking about it and through classes. Going there and seeing firsthand is indispensable towards a deeper understanding of what happened. And that was certainly the case for me in my life. I mean, it was the year that I lived there. I had studied at Hebrew University prior to that, but it was the year that I lived there that really changed my life. And I know we weren't there for a year, but certainly I think you'll hear from some of the others that even just for the 2 weeks that we were there, seeing firsthand about the effects of the conflict on the people there was really a powerful experience. So those were the two main goals, and I would say the third subsidiary goal was just developing a sense of fellowship among the people that went. This was a Presbyterian trip, and so because we were all Presbyterians, because most of us went through this extensive preparation together, we did develop a sense of community, which for me is important, is not just a bonus, is actually integral to the nature of the trip itself. So those were the goals of our trip. After returning from the trip, several weeks later, I went to General Assembly. I'm a member, I've been a member for several years of the Israel-Palestine Mission Network of our denomination. And I went there to support their work and to advocate and speak on behalf of Israel-Palestine issues. The committee that dealt with those issues was one of the most heavily attended committees at General Assembly, and they had so many people that signed up to speak that they had to, 160 actually, that they had to pick a lottery. And fortunately my name was called, so I was able to speak briefly on some of the issues that came out that the General Assembly addressed. I think many of the people who were at General Assembly, including myself, would say that the results for General Assembly were a bit mixed, and regardless of perspective, I think a lot of people would say that. But one of the things that did come out of the General Assembly, I don't think this was new, but this was certainly re-emphasized, was this call that goes out to Presbyterians to learn more about the conflict, to go to the region, and to do more study about it. And so in light of that call from our denomination, I feel like what we are doing as a peacemaking committee in terms of our work on this trip really dovetails very nicely with what we are called to do by our denomination. And so we're hoping as a committee to be able to lead a similar trip again next year. And in preparation for that, we hope the group that went on this trip would like to be able to go to different churches and different groups and share about our own experiences, which were, as you can imagine, very powerful. So we encourage you to invite members of our group to come speak, and we encourage you to consider going yourself on a similar trip next year. I promise you it will be an eye-opening experience. And if you're not able to go, we would encourage you to consider a scholarship in support of somebody else. So we're doing what our denomination says we're doing, and it's an exciting, at least for me, life-changing experience. And so we hope you'll join us in the future.